welcome to LSAT Unplugged.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for joining. So I suppose I should start off by clarifying that although we share a last name, we're not related, at least as far as I know.
As far as I know, too.
Okay, great. So I understand that you're at UCLA Law in the admissions department. You're the Dean of Admissions. Can you share a little more about your background and experience?
Sure, yeah. I've been here at UCLA Law for almost 13 years now. Time flies quickly. Before that, right before that, I was Dean of Admissions at Cardozo Law School in New York City, part of Yeshiva University, and I was there, I think, for about 11 or 12 years. I did go to law school before that, and I practiced briefly, mostly in the fields of family law and bankruptcy, and also clerked for a year right after law school.
Oh, wow. So you've been in admissions for quite a long time.
I have. One of the older ones, I guess.
What are some of the trends you've noticed over time?
Oh, boy, so many of them. This may not be of much interest, but I mean, when you think back to really when I started, I mean, everything was done by paper, and the review process was, much more challenging in that regard. And I think both for applicants and for admissions folks, people used to have to mail in their application, and we had to open the envelope and create a file, and we received their LSAT score and transcripts all by mail. So a lot of changes over the years through electronic, the ability for people to apply electronically. I think that's good and bad, on both sides. I think for applicants now, it's so easy to apply to many law schools that I don't know if applicants give that much thought to it. It's just so easy to hit a few extra buttons, and the fields just populate that are common. And so it's easy to just throw out 20, 25 applications and see where all the dust settles.
Well, it's very interesting. I would imagine that from your perspective, then, you're getting a greater number of applications for any given slot for which you could grant admission.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, over the years, there's been significant differences in volume, both up and down. But I do think, and I don't know this off the top of my head, but I could find out if I went back 20 years, I suspect that the number of law schools that each applicant was applying to was a lot less than it is today.
Yeah, I would imagine so as well, maybe going from like 3 or 4 to maybe 10 or 12 or beyond that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So given that, of course, there is increased volume on your end, you have to evaluate far more applications for any given slot. What advice do you give students? What are some common mistakes you see students making with their application? I'm thinking in particular of the personal statement, but of course, if anything else comes to mind.
Well, mostly I would just say it's sloppiness is probably the most common mistake. And it sounds so basic when I say it, but it's true how often it happens that people are just sloppy in the personal statement, either by putting the wrong name of the law school at the end of the statement or just not proofreading it very carefully. And it can be frustrating on this side of the desk, right, when you're reading a lot of these and then you see somebody that just hasn't taken the time to be professional in the application. And, the legal profession is a profession, and we want people who are going to you need to pay attention to detail. So it's good to start doing that when you're applying to law school. That really is far and away the most common mistake I see, especially with the personal statement, is just putting in the wrong name of the law school. And also just not proofreading it very carefully, or even submitting something with still track changes in it. So it happens.
Well, that's incredible. And of course, we want future lawyers to be detail-oriented. That's quite important in your law school applications. And of course, that's demonstrated on the LSAT as well. Now, I'm wondering, what about, let's say someone has done everything right, but just due to the competitive nature of admissions, they end up being placed on the wait list. I would imagine that waitlisting and deferring is also something that I've seen on my end has increased over time for applicants. It's become a lot more frequent.
Yeah, law schools need a waiting list. We're not sure how things are going to turn out before our deposit deadlines, and so we need to have people on the waiting list. And I encourage people who are on the waiting list to express their interest, to do so in a respectful way, in a way that any law school suggests. Most law schools are going to be upfront about usually will provide FAQs, for example, for somebody on the waiting list, how often to express your continued interest and how to express it and what additional materials you can submit. And I encourage anybody in that position to do that and to express your interest, but also, if possible, to try to then put it out of your mind, presume it's not going to happen, and then hopefully be pleasantly surprised.
What percentage of applicants, if you're able to share, what percentage of applicants typically does UCLA waitlist or defer?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by defer. We don't really, so to me, defer means we're admitting somebody and then they request to defer to the following year. So I'm not sure if that's what you're asking about. That's a whole separate issue. As a percentage of applicants, I would say off the top of my head, obviously it depends how many applicants we get, but I would say maybe 10 to 15% of the applicants each year are offered a spot on the waiting list.
Okay, so out of those 10 to 15% each cycle over the years, have you noticed any particular standout examples of applicants who demonstrated continued interest in a desirable way? And then on the flip side, any standouts in a negative light?
Yes, both for sure. Should we start with the negative first?
Yeah, sure. That's always juicy, right?
More fun. I think there have been people that have just shown up outside our office on the day of orientation morning. So I'm walking in on what's going to be a very busy day, and they're here before I'm even here, so it's 7:30 in the morning, and they're just sitting outside the office thinking that because they're there, in case somebody doesn't show, that seat's going to go to them. And that just, I think, just shows bad judgment. And we've had people buy lunch and send it in to the entire office, or send desserts and cakes and things like that. So obviously that's on the inappropriate side. Hopefully most people would realize that. On the plus side, I think it's really expressing as clearly as you can why it is that you feel that you want to be part of a particular law school, and in our case, UCLA, maybe some of the particular programs we offer, and why you might be a good fit for that. But at the end of the day, I think you have to realize, as long as you're doing that, you're doing the best that you can. And it's factors outside your control sometimes that are going to ultimately dictate whether or not a school is going to be able to offer you a seat, because it's going to depend how many people withdraw, who those people are, things of that nature.
I would imagine that each cycle you get a particular applicant pool that varies, and so your ultimate decision for whether to admit a particular candidate or not is based on the mix of who else is coming in that cycle.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yep.
So it's not personal, I guess is what you're saying.
Absolutely. None of this is personal. Although I know it feels like it. I've been on waiting lists.
I was asking, do you eat the free lunch that they send you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. All right, excellent. So we're talking about changes in the past few years. Two biggest changes I can think of. One is the GRE, and one is the LSAT going digital. And so I'll start with the admission side with the GRE. What's your take on that whole thing?
Well, it's our first year. I guess I should say our second year. The first year we allowed people who were joint degree candidates at UCLA to apply to the law school with the GRE. This past cycle, the one we're in right now still, was the first year that we fully opened it up. And it's been interesting to me. It's still a little early to say how many people we'll have in the first year class who will actually matriculate with a GRE score, but I think it will be relatively small. Certainly no more than 5% and probably less than that. So my take on it is, for somebody who wants to apply to law school and has already taken the GRE because they're in a joint degree program, or for any other reason, sure, give it a shot. But I still think for the majority of applicants in this country and to UCLA, the law school admissions test is obviously the way to go.
And thanks for sharing the numbers on that.
What's that?
I was just saying, thanks for sharing the numbers on that. I think the 5% or below, around that ballpark, I think is a good way to at least get a handle on what the scope of this is like. Because obviously it gets a lot of headlines, but the reality, of course, is that it's still a very small percentage. Yes,
absolutely.
Now, what does your average GRE applicant look like whom you might consider for admission?
Well, as I say, the numbers are quite small this year, but most of them are people who have pursued an advanced degree, or are in the process of pursuing an advanced degree. Also have very strong GRE scores, although it's not really possible to equate a GRE score with an LSAT score. People that we're admitting have done very well and have certainly, I would say, comparable percentile scores that we would take on the LSAT.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Do they have any particular work experience background, like perhaps in STEM or something else?
I don't think I could generalize. I think it's been, and I'd have to go back and take a look, but I think the one thought that comes to mind is that most of them were pursuing some sort of, that are perhaps generally an older applicant, been out of school a little bit longer, maybe already have an advanced degree or are pursuing an advanced degree. I don't know about the STEM so much. We get a good number of STEM students. Right now, I'd say about 15% of our incoming class has a STEM background, and the vast majority of them took the LSAT.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Good to know. Thanks. Another thing that's been coming to mind for me is of course, the LSAT going digital this year. And I know that that's more my side than your side. But the reason I bring it up is that a lot of applicants are a little bit nervous about the transition towards the digital LSAT. And they're perhaps worried that if they take the digital LSAT, let's say this fall, and their results aren't as good as they would otherwise be because there's less prep material available for that format, would that impact how someone like yourself might look at LSAT scores this cycle?
Well, I got to tell you, this is the first time I'm hearing I know about the digital LSAT, but really hadn't thought much about what your question and about the concerns that prospective students might have. Generally, I would say, though, as a general rule, we're going to put a lot of weight on the higher LSAT score. So if somebody takes the LSAT and for whatever reason doesn't score well, either because they were sick with a cold or the flu or because it was the digital LSAT, they're welcome to include an addendum with their application indicating what was going on, what their concerns were. On our application, we actually have a specific question which says, is there anything you want to tell us about your standardized test taking? So I would encourage anybody in that situation to then take it again and to get the kinks out, so to speak, and then to be able to explain that to us. And I think we would be understanding of that. Law schools are, again, speak for law schools, but for us, we're going to put a lot of weight on the higher score. That's the score that if you enroll, we're going to report to the American Bar Association. I don't think folks should be too overly concerned about that.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. So it sounds like folks could write an addendum, but also the answer is kind of just retake, get the higher score, get used to it, and because that's what you have to report.
Exactly. But I appreciate you. I'm going to think a little bit more about that. I hadn't really thought about that concern. So
yeah, sure. It's kind of just a funny time with this transition this year. A lot of folks are like, I want to take it in June and get it over with before it starts the transition towards digital. And other folks are like, it's not that big a deal. So applicants on all sides have different perspectives on it. But I think,
correct me if I'm wrong, don't students taking it at a certain administration the first time, won't they have an opportunity to find out their score and then have it canceled?
Yeah, so there's a funny thing happening with the July LSAT in particular. Yeah. Half of test takers will be assigned the digital, half will be assigned the paper. They don't get any advance notice. And wow. It's crazy, right? And then whichever one the applicant gets, the test taker gets, they can still see their score before deciding whether to cancel.
Got it.
Which is kind of a nice little olive branch. It's sort of a feel-good thing. I'm thinking back to like SAT score choice.
Right.
But as you're saying, though, at the same time, though, you do consider the higher score. And so for that reason, I would imagine that there's not an enormous benefit to even a cancellation because you can always retake.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I would add the caveat, though, just as a general, sometimes we see people that are applying that have taken the test maybe 10 or more times. And I think there becomes a point where, quantity is not a good thing, even if there is one score that is significantly better. So I think you need to, unless you really enjoy taking standardized tests, you really need to be prepared when you go in, but hopefully it makes you feel a little bit better to know that it's not everything riding on that if you don't have your best testing day, if you know that you're capable of performing better based on your practice test, then you give it another shot or maybe another shot after that. But, hopefully 3 times will be the charm.
100%. Definitely. I think that there's a ceiling. You certainly don't want to have 10 or more takes on your record. But I'm also thinking about how previously I've seen the typical applicant maybe has taken it 2 to 3 times, at least the ones that I come across. But with the LSAT being offered with increased frequency going forward, it used to be only 4 times a year. now it's going to be 9 or 10 times a year. I'm wondering if that may increase the average number of takes for a given applicant, and if that would then on your end increase the number of takes that you consider to be reasonable.
It may, and I think, as I said, I don't know why somebody would really want to put themselves through that so many times. I think you really want to go in when you're 100% ready and prepared, knowing that if it's not your best day, you can do it again or maybe one more time. But, I don't think it reflects well, at least from our perspective here, our admissions committee, when we see somebody who just keeps taking that test over and over again.
Certainly, yeah, there's definitely a limit. I think we agree on that. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate your sharing your advice with everyone. Before we sign off, do you want to just share a little bit on UCLA Law and what it has to offer? And then, of course, how folks can reach you?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. I mean, try not to go on too long. I could talk forever about UCLA Law School. In terms of how they can reach me, they can go to our website at law.ucla.edu, which will tell them a lot about the law school. They can reach me at Schwartz, SCHWARTZR, at law.ucla.edu. And one of the aspects of my job that I like the most is talking to prospective students and helping them figure out. I think UCLA Law School is a wonderful law school. I wouldn't be here for 13 years if I didn't think that. It's a law school in many ways that sells itself, but we're not necessarily right for everyone. And so part of what I like about my job is getting to know people, what they're looking for in a law school, and helping them figure out if this is the right place for them. We offer so much here that it's impossible in just a few minutes to do it justice. But lately I've been saying to a lot of prospective students that I think the hardest thing about law school, especially here at UCLA, is in the second and third year when you're trying to decide what in the world to take. You can pick 4 or 5 classes, and there's perhaps more than 200 classes to choose from, maybe 50 clinical classes, 15 or so student-edited journals and externships and study abroad programs. And how do you figure that all out? In terms of areas where we focus and specialize, we have about 7 different areas where you can specialize. Business law is one, critical race studies is another, public interest law, environmental law. We'll see if I get them all. Entertainment law, can't forget that one. We're in Los Angeles. Law and philosophy, and international law and human rights. We just got a huge gift to establish what's called the Promise Institute for Human Rights. We have a number of research centers and think tanks, and so the Promise Institute is one, the Emmett Center on Climate Change is another, the Williams Institute on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Law is another. So those are some of the unique aspects of the law school, but I'm happy to chat with anybody individually, and we encourage people, if you're going to be in LA, to swing by, come on in and take a tour, sit in on a class, and see what the place is like.
Well, that sounds really interesting. I didn't even know so many of those areas of law existed, let alone they're at UCLA. And that sounds like a folks should definitely go and check out your website and find out more about each of those particular areas. And reach out to you too. And maybe when I'm in LA, I'll come sit in on a class too.
We would welcome that. Yes, absolutely. It'd be great to meet you in person.
Thanks. Well, same. And Dean Schwartz, I really appreciate your taking the time today to share these pieces of advice with our applicants.
No problem. Thanks for what you're doing. I think it's really interesting, and good luck.
Thank you. You as well. Take care. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.